Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here, Vance, and everyone, thanks for coming. I'm going to be talking about Ionic and how we use it to build currently 3 apps, but soon 5 apps from one code base. So first, this is the app that my wife and I created that helps you grow food. You can search for it in the App Store, and it'll walk you through growing food. But really today, I'm going to be talking about Ionic. So first off, what is Ionic? And Ionic is a framework that lets you build apps from one code base that is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and then it builds out versions of each. So it is different from native apps, and it's important to talk about the differences up front so you can identify if it's something that you could use. The main difference in describing them is Ionic has a web browser that it pops up, and then it emulates everything inside of that to look like a mobile app. So for iOS, it makes everything inside of that look like it should look on an iOS app. On Android, it does the same for Android. And it has a CSS framework built into it that does that for you automatically, so you don't have to code anything special. But if you want to make things look a certain way, across all the platforms you can. So long story short, that's the big difference between Ionic and native. There are some performance hits that you can get with that. Our app isn't doing anything too intensive, so for us, it's fine. The pros outweigh the cons. But if you want to build a game or if you want to build something that does something graphically intensive, you probably need to look at React Native or just the native platforms instead. But today we're going to be talking about Ionic, and I want to talk about why we chose Ionic initially. So first off, it was easy for me to get started. I learned how to code last year with Ionic. So the framework and the documentation was really easy for me to get started with. Also, it's HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. I had a lifetime of HTML knowledge just trying to make my MySpace look different as a kid and doing all that kind of stuff younger. So it was familiar to me, and for me, I just had to learn JavaScript and TypeScript. That was the big reason for me initially. But also, the one code base for 5 apps has become a really big thing for us as we've moved forward in our development of Seed to Spoon. Initially, it was because I wanted to have an app for iOS and Android, and I didn't want to have to learn both native code bases. But now it's evolved into more than that. So we have a web app. If you go to seedtospoon.app, that's a web app now. That's the same version of our app. That's been incredibly useful now because as our user base has grown, we've had a lot of questions of like, can you be on the Kindle Fire? Can I use it on my computer? Can I use it here and there? Well, now the answer is yes. No matter what device you're on, you can use our app. Also, they have Electron apps you can build for Windows and for Mac. So that's a big, big thing with Ionic that we think is really valuable because it allows us to be on more platforms. And when you're trying to get a product off the ground, that is really powerful because you're not stuck just being on one platform. You can be on all of them with one code base. Also, it uses Angular. For me, that's really powerful for me because I do my day job is I build Angular sites. So I'm able to use both throughout the day, and that makes it easier. But really, the big thing for me about Ionic more than anything was the UI framework. So I grabbed a screen grab from their website earlier to show this. This is the documentation they have. So when I was building a list, for example, I could go through and look at all the different lists that they've already built, and I could choose the one that I want, and the code is over on the left. So this is just a really great experience, especially for in the design phase of an app, whenever I didn't really know how I wanted things to work or how I wanted things to feel. They have an example app. It's not made through Ionic, but it's an app that's out there you can download, and you can go through and use all of these on the actual device. So the way I was building an app was I would start by identifying the problem I was trying to solve, and then I would go use these components and then match them up in my head of what component solves the problem best for me. And that was a really easy way for me to build an app. I'm not a great designer, but I don't have to be because Ionic makes that simple. So let's jump into talking about how to start a project, and it's really simple. Once you download Ionic, just through npm install Ionic, it's one command of Ionic start. And I've got this video here that shows it's literally less than a minute to get started. You type Ionic start, and then it asks you for the app name. It's going to ask you a few other things here, what type of template you want to start with. I chose tabs for the purpose of this video, so that's what I'm going to show here in a minute. But you can choose all these different types of templates to start with, and it goes through and it builds out the project. This is probably a good time to mention Cordova. That's what it asked me about there, is if you want to use Cordova. Cordova is what lets you actually use the things on the device, so the camera, the geolocation, all of those type of things on the device you can use through Cordova. It's an Apache library that's maintained, so it's a plug-in library that you can use regardless of the platform. And it can be a challenge. Ionic's working on a new version called Capacitor that's supposed to replace Cordova, and I'm really excited about that because out of all the challenges with Ionic, Cordova will be the one that you'll find most frustrating. So once you get the app set up, to start the app, it's as simple as Ionic serve. So I've already run that. Actually, I have it here. So Ionic serve, and you run that, and it's going to launch a web browser that lets you pull up the app and see how it would work on the device there. So you'll see it'll come up here. Using DevTools, it's really easy to go into device mode. So here now is an app that you can start working on. Yes. Uh-oh. Oh, is it off screen? Yeah, that's probably it.
Are you using PowerPoint?
We good now? Oh.
Dale, are you using PowerPoint?
It's the browser that I'm showing right now because it just opened Chrome.
The presentation is in PowerPoint and in presenter view.
Okay.
They cost this.
Okay, great, thank you. Let me try getting out of there now. So, awesome, thank you, Kristen. Okay, so this is the app now, and you can see this is just HTML. So if I wanted to go in and edit that, I should have had that. This is my app pulled up here, but you can see this is the UI for it. It's just HTML. So you can edit it in real time. It'll change there, and you can't use any of the Cordova stuff here, like the camera and all that kind of stuff, obviously. But it's a really easy way to do development. And they also have an app called Dev App that you can download so that you can mirror this over to your device, so you can actually see that on a device as well. So that's running the project, and then once obviously there's a whole other aspect of building your app, and I don't have time to get into that here today. But now I'm going to move into once you have your app built and you have it looking how you want it and you're ready to release, how do you get into the stores? So Android, it's pretty simple. You either have a guide on their website you go through. You can do it from any device, and you build an IPA file, and then once you have that IPA file, you can just upload it in through Android Studio. With iOS, it's more difficult. You have to have a Mac. And it's a more convoluted process. Again, there's a guide on their website. It will be painful. If you have problems with it, reach out to me. I'll be more than happy to help prevent the pain of what I went through with getting this set up. So Firebase with PWAs is really simple to get up and going. Firebase has been awesome, by the way, and we learned a lot from you, Kristen. Thank you. We were literally on the way here. I was talking to my developer about a problem we had with Firebase that you solved for us. So with PWAs, you can build those, and that's the web app that we have. That's one command to build those. It's really simple. And then Electron is a framework that you can build Windows and Mac apps as well. So it just takes your app and puts it inside of a window, and it can run on a Mac and in Windows. I discounted how important that was early on, but now that we've had a lot of, especially senior users, asking for Windows apps, they really like the Windows App Store. I've never used an app in there. But a lot of people like it. So that's really the power of Ionic, is you get to be everywhere with one code base. And for us, we took an idea a year ago. We just had an idea of a mobile app we wanted to make. And now that app has 50,000 downloads, and if you search for growing food, it's the #1 result. And Ionic was a huge reason why we were able to do that, because the UI framework and the framework itself just made it to where I didn't have to think about the details on things. It did that for me. And in the beginning of a business, that was important. If I had to build a native app, we would still be looking at version 1 beta of Seed to Spoon. So that's what I had to talk about today. Are there any questions about Ionic? Or yes, Aaron?
Yeah, we've got one from the Twitch chat room. What hardware or features, if any, does Ionic Cordova not have access to?
Okay, the question was, what hardware or features does Ionic or Cordova not have access to? We have not found anything yet. The Cordova library is very extensive. Now, again, I will say it's painful to actually use it some of the times. But there's not been anything that we have found that we don't have access to. But again, we're not doing anything super complicated. If I were building a gaming app or something, I'm sure there would have been frustrations. But we've done things like geolocation. We use that to determine planting dates. We've started to dabble into the camera. The camera's really easy. We've used, I'm sure Justin is screaming at me right now because there's other things we've used that I forgot about, because we do have about 12 Cordova plugins in there now. So I think device status, knowing when the device is ready, knowing those type of things. There's all sorts of stuff. And if you just go to the Ionic page, there's a whole library. And like I said, they're building Capacitor, and it's going to make this a whole lot better. And what that's going to do is give you access at the PWA level. So right now, these Cordova plugins are not going to work in our web app. But when we switch to Capacitor, which is Ionic's new replacement for Cordova, basically, these work everywhere. So even in the web app, we'll be able to use the camera and all that kind of stuff. So they're moving on it quickly. They're building this stuff out in a hurry. That's really been impressive to see what they've done over the past year. Ionic 4 is in beta. It's coming out soon. It's going to make things even easier. 6 months ago, we were on the fence of switching to React Native or Xamarin. We were considering doing it, but now I think we're going to stay with Ionic for a while at least, until we run into a situation where there's something that is where we're hitting the limitations of the hardware, or things just don't feel like a good app. You know, if things start to feel sluggish, we're going to bounce. But I'm confident that that's not going to happen, because this stuff is evolving so quickly, and it's pretty exciting to see. So I'm a big fan of Ionic. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, the question was what happens when you have no service or limited service. So it'll work just as normal. So our app actually will calculate the planting dates no matter, so as long as you have GPS location, it'll calculate it, because we're storing that local, all that information. But you can use, like for the PWA, for the web app, you can use things like, it has like service workers, things like that built in. It has offline support for all of that. But when it's an app, it's an app. So it's just, you know, you're limited as far as how you code it on offline support at that point. So if you're relying on web calls and stuff, then you're gonna have a problem. But if you're storing data locally and you're doing all of that, then you can pull off, pretty much anything. Even though I will mention too, one of the features we're working on in our app uses the Azure machine learning service to let you take a picture of a pest and tell what it is. That is something that we can store that all in the device too. We were at Microsoft Build in May talking to that team, and that is built in such a way that you can download that data to the device and then use it on the device without having to call a web service. So I'm really excited about how fast, and it was a gamble for us, I feel like, in the beginning to bet on this as our framework to use, but it really paid off, so I'm glad we did. Yes, Aaron?
What advice would you give someone stuck between choosing React Native, Ionic, and Xamarin? What criteria would you use to make the decision?
So the question was, what advice would you give someone that's stuck between Ionic, React Native, and Xamarin? For me, the decision was simple, because I work in an office that's surrounded by some of the best Angular developers I know, and that's what we do. So for me, I didn't know how to code when I started building this, so I jumped into what I had the most help around me for. And I'm guessing everyone else has a similar background. If you have experience with React, go with React Native. If you're more comfortable with Angular, look at Ionic. Xamarin is also evolving and is getting better and better every year too. I don't have a great C# background, and so for me it was, and also the power of the UI framework is a real differentiator between Ionic and the other ones, because with all the other ones you either have to go buy a UI framework or build your own. And I am not a great designer. I'm just good at knowing what looks good and at choosing things that are already built that look good and putting them together. That's what I'm good at. So Ionic made that really simple, because the framework is built in. It's super simple to use, especially for a beginner, and it helped us get off the ground. So I think your past experience really is more than anything. If you have a lot of C# experience, I'd probably push you towards Xamarin, and then spend some money on one of the UI frameworks. But for me personally, it was just, I really wanted to get an app out, and in the past, those kind of decisions were the things that kept me from ever doing anything. So I just had to make a decision on something and start building it, and now I'm glad we did, with Ionic at least. Yes?
Did you install Electron in the Ionic app next to Cordova, and you just were able to build the same app with Electron?
Okay, so I have not done the Electron stuff yet. That's why I said we'll have 5 soon. Right now we just have 3. Electron is on my list for the next few weeks to get done, is to get those built. I've done some sample apps testing, I've gone through tutorials, I've done all that, but I haven't hooked into ours yet. I think I've built an Electron app for Windows, but the challenge I ran into was building out the installer, that whole process of it. Because once you have the app, you have to have an installer for it, you have to register it and all that. So I found a package that does that, and I'll be diving into that over the next few weeks. But I haven't personally done it with my app yet, so I can't say if there's going to be any. Now, everything I've said, I haven't seen anything where there's crossover interference between, Now, the Cordova stuff is not going to work in the Electron app, I know that, but we're going to use Capacitor for that. So we're going to pull in the Capacitor plugin for replacing the geolocation stuff, and then that's the only real Cordova plugin that we need in that version of the app. Yeah, so that's a great question. The question was, what does your browser use when you're looking at an app? So it uses the user agent. So if I choose in DevTools, if I choose iPhone, And then you've got to refresh afterwards, because then that resets the user agent and the browser picks it up. But then, so let me just show. So I'm set on iPhone right now. Let's switch this to Android and see if I bet the icons at the bottom will look different. Yeah. Well, so what I'm showing right now is just the web version I'm using when I'm debugging. So this is just when I'm doing debugging and I want to see how it looks on each device. I can switch between Android and iOS. But I see what you're saying now for the PWA version, what does it look like? So that is a separate mode. So in Ionic, there's tablet mode, there's phone mode, there's different variations of each, and there's also, I think it's called Core is the mode for desktop. So that's what I target for Core, because I have it set to where I didn't test this before, this should work. So if I go to app.c2spoon.net, I have this set so it doesn't go full width, because I didn't like the way the page looked whenever it took up the whole width. So I set a max width on it, so it looks like that. So that was a custom styling I did for just the Core version, not the iPad or iPhone version. So there are custom stylings that you can apply to whatever version you want, just through CSS or whatever. And then you could even build it out. Right now we have it all inline, so it's in the same page, but we're probably going to build it out so we'll have separate components for each. So I have a component for the tablet view, a component for the phone view, and then we can just inject that into the main component and then just do some ngIFs to show different stylings depending on the device. So far we've been able to get away without really having to do much in the way of custom UI stuff. I try and live within Ionic's framework as much as possible so it's not brittle. Because if I have a lot of custom stuff in there and then iOS completely changes its look, if I'm using the built-in Ionic stuff, that's just going to naturally evolve. But if I did a lot of custom stuff, now I'm on the hook for doing all that. Yeah, no problem. No, it's really simple. So we use a service for all. So the question is interacting with the data any different between mobile devices, between Android or iOS or anything like that? And no, all the data is structured as a JSON. So we store all of that. It's handled through a service. So that code doesn't even know what device it's working on. The UI code is the HTML UI side is the only stuff that even knows what device it's on for the most part. There may be, I don't think we've run into anything where we have to have like JavaScript code that's dependent on each device. So you just have the service layer, just like you would with an Angular app, where it's what deals with the data. Now, I will say about Firebase, it's a lot easier than building Angular apps because I don't have to use any framework or anything like that to translate between the relational database. You're just passing up the object. So we have a vegetables object that contains all of the data for the vegetables in the app. We're just passing that down, and then so it makes it simple in that way that you don't have to translate. Yes, sir.
Is incorporating the web version of the app something you did out of the gate, or is that something you're going to add later? What would you recommend?
So the web version we did not do until probably 2 months ago, and that was a big mistake. I'm sorry. The question. So the question was, did we incorporate the web version of the app in the beginning or at the end? And so we didn't do that until a few months ago, and it was a huge mistake because we should have had that out of the gate. It is so easy to build the web version of the app, especially with Firebase. You add in the Firebase project, and then you run a build, and you do Firebase deploy. And that is literally all you have to do. And even from the Firebase console, you can set the domain stuff there. So I bought the domain on Namecheap, and then I just set the DNS and pointed. I didn't have to use anything other than, it was 5 minutes to have it up, and I felt pretty silly afterwards because we had had a lot of users up until then ask us, about Kindle Fire, all that kind of thing. And I kept, one day, and then I finally do it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I could have had this in less than 5 minutes. So I would recommend that being the first version of the app that you build because you can get it on a device. I think it's important to get the app on a device, not just see it in a browser. You need to use it on a device. It's a different way of looking at apps when you're using it that way. So I would recommend getting that app up first. And then that way you have it. And then what we're starting to do is use that almost as not necessarily beta, but kind of an early release area. So when I'm trying new things, I could put it out there. I could set up another node on Firebase and have a beta version up there so that when I want to test things, I don't have to go through the whole test flight process or through any building process or anything to get it in the hands of users. I can just code it, and 5 minutes later, I can throw it up on our Facebook page and say, hey, I have something new for y'all to try. And that is really, really nice because the build process is painful, and I only do it about once a month right now, and I'm thankful for that. I will say Ionic is working hard to improve the build process with their framework. They have a deploy service that lets you build in the cloud. So once you set up your certs and whatnot, you can just check in, and it'll automatically build an app in the cloud, and then you can download it. They also have, there's also some services that let you update background data in the app easily. So Code Push from Microsoft is one service, but also Ionic has a service that lets you push background updates to HTML and CSS to your app. I don't use it as much because I like to release updates and that I view them as marketing opportunities to talk to my user because those release notes go into the App Store, and it's a way for me to have a conversation with the user. So I like to put out at least one a month just from that aspect. But if we do have maybe an embarrassing bug or a typo, or maybe we want to switch up the ads that are shown in the app, we show Amazon affiliate ads in the app, and we hand roll those. We choose products we use that I want people to I want to recommend. If we want to switch those up, we'll do that in the background. But yeah. Any other questions about anything? Yes. Did I have any issues submitting to the App Store? Thankfully, no. I've had a lot of headaches in the past. I used to work at All Mode, and I was involved in the mobile apps there, and there were a lot of headaches in the past. But thankfully, no, I did not have any issues submitting. Once we actually got it submitted, it was fine. The headaches were all around building the app and getting the Cordova plugins to work. And really and I'll tell you this now, every single issue we've had building has been related to a Cordova plugin. So the way that I handle Cordova plugins now is I will add one at a time, and then I build. And then I add that, and if it still builds, then I know I'm good. And I don't go add 10 plugins in one day again, because then Xcode is a nightmare of trying. The error messages are so long, and they're so scary, and they just make me want to cry. Especially in the beginning, there was like 2 or 3 days of just staring at this error message and Googling, and I didn't really know anyone else that I could reach out to in this area, and it was so scary. That's why I say if you run into these, please reach out to me. Don't let that stop you, because that was the scariest process out of all of it, is just dealing with the Xcode nightmare of why I want this build. So yeah. So please, if you get stuck on that, do not stop. Just reach out. Someone will help you. Hopefully me. Yes. Were you talking about when you rotate the phone, like with the orientation? So in iTunes, you can set the orientation. I'm sorry. So the question was, are there any issues when you rotate the phone and the orientation changes? Is that basically what your question is? So the question was on native apps. When the phone rotates, I guess on native apps, it destroys a lot of the variables that you set and it kind of refreshes the UI. That does not happen with Ionic. It's just a web view, so it just kind of so I have my app set so you can't do that. In iTunes, we have it set to be locked portrait orientation because I don't like the way it looks landscape, and I don't want to. One day I'll build out a new UI so it looks good landscape, but I just don't want to do that right now. So I have ours locked where you can't do that. But no, but if that isn't an option for you, it's not going to destroy. At least I haven't seen it do anything like that. So I can't personally say it's not, but I don't see why it would, and I've never had any issues with things rotating. I just didn't like the way it looked when it rotated. Anything else? Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for giving me time to speak.